Here is our very first paragraph of the passage. The history of any major technological or industrial advance is inevitably shadowed by a less predictable history of unintended consequences and secondary effects, which economists sometimes called externalities. When I read this passage so far, what do I get to know? That whenever some technological innovation happens, or any new innovation happens for that matter, what happens eventually? So many good things. But author says that there are some unintended consequences also of that. Unintended. You did not intend that, you did not think about it, but these things do happen. And author says that some economists call these unintended consequences as externalities. So what this passage could be about? Let's go for some active reading, right? The passage seems to be about unintended consequences of technological innovation. I might be wrong, because later when we are going to read the rest of the paragraph, maybe there is something else also, but so far. And if the passage is about unintended consequences of technological innovation, what are these unintended consequences? Maybe some technological innovation also should be talked about here. Are these unintended consequences beneficial or not? And so forth. So many questions arise. Now let's read the rest of the passage, and then we'll get to know how many of these questions that we anticipated were actually there and were answered. Okay, let's go further. Sometimes those consequences are innocuous ones or even beneficial. So we got the answer of at least one of our questions, that it can be beneficial or not. Gutenberg invents the printing press and literary rates rise, which caused a significant part of the reading public to require spectacles for the first time, which eventually led to lens making and telescope and microscope. Now that's an unintended consequence. Here's an example also given. There is a guy who invented printing press. Now when you invent printing press, you basically are printing a lot of material which people will read, and when they will read, they might require spectacles. So when Gutenberg invented printing press, he might not have thought of this thing that, okay, I'm going to create a new industry of spectacles, lens and whatnot, and microscopes also will come into picture, right? But these were the unintended consequences. So that's exactly what the passage is about. So what should be a good topic for me? Very simple. A good topic for me would be unintended effects of innovation. That's what I'm talking about. Now, if rest of the passage changes the idea, then we will revisit the topic. If not, then of course, that's absolutely okay. And the argument that I'm here exploring is that technological advancements often yield unintended consequences, sometimes beneficial, sometimes not. And there is an example of printing press. Now let's go further. Oftentimes, the secondary effects seem to belong to an entirely different sphere of society. Okay. When Willis Carrier hit upon the idea of air conditioning, the technology was primarily intended for industrial use, so that you can cool the hot environments, or you can dry them humid environments and so. But it touched off one of the greatest migrations in the history of the United States, enabling the rise of metropolitan areas like Phoenix and Las Vegas that barely existed when Carrier first started tinkering with the idea in the early 1900s. Now that's another example. But here author says that sometimes these secondary effects are belonging to an entirely different category. For example, this guy who invented air conditioner, he thought that I am basically inventing air conditioner, say for the industrial environment where there is high humidity, high temperature, and of course I would want to cool that down or dry it up. But what were the unintended consequences? It gave rise to metropolitan cities. So probably all these places that are mentioned here, which are Las Vegas, Phoenix, etc., they are hot. And because of air conditioning, these places were developed, because now people could think that, okay, we can also live here. Now, this guy, Willis, might not have anticipated that, right? So that's an interesting thing. Sometimes the unintended consequences comes about when consumers use an innovation in a surprising way. So author is just talking about various types of secondary consequences. One could be that, basically outside of what the creator was thinking. One could be that creator was not even imagining a thing, but rather some other people used the innovation in a different manner. Okay, for example, if you ever played pen fight, then the creator of the pen might never have thought that will use pens for that pen fight game in your classes on your desks, right? So that is an unintended consequence because user used it in a different manner. So here are some examples which are given. Author says that there is a guy called Edison. He created phonograph. Why? To take dictation. But eventually users started using it as a musical record, something which can play music. Interesting, no? Then there are other examples. You are talking about this guy Jacquard. He invented the first programmable loom. Charles Babbage invented a particular machine which eventually led to the creation of modern day computer and so on. So when users use a given innovation in the manner they intend, that also can spur a lot of unintended consequences. So far they are beneficial. I don't know if there are non-beneficial as well. So let's take a look at the upcoming paragraph. We live under the gathering storm of modern history's most momentous unintended consequence, carbon-based climate change. See, so far we were discussing all the positives and now we are talking about a negative unintended consequence of innovation. So what author is saying, that author says that imagine the vast sweep of inventors whose ideas started the industrial revolution, all the entrepreneurs and scientists and hobbyists who had a hand in bringing it about. So many people actually caused this carbon based climate change. And author then says that if you ask them that this is what you were hoping for, they will say no, of course, this is not what author is talking about. These are unintended consequences. When these people sort of created something, they never thought that it will result in something which is not beneficial. It will result in something which is, climate change, for example. Anyway, so this is what author is saying, that industrial revolution basically unintentionally led to carbon emissions and climate change, and this consequence basically was not foreseen by its innovators, and now it is impacting the planet. Here are some more examples of those inventions which led to negative unintended consequences. Ethyl, leaded fuel, and freon belong to the same general class of secondary effect. Innovations whose unintended consequences stem from some kind of waste byproduct that they emit. So they emit a waste byproduct, and because of that byproduct that these ethyl and freon emit, there are unintended consequences related to the same idea of climate change, carbon-based climate change. But the potential threats of ethyl were visible in 1920s, unlike the long-term effects of atmospheric carbon built up in the early days of industrial revolution. But here author gives a bit of caution as well. Author says, but at least as far as ethyl is concerned, we were slightly aware of the potential health threat of it, which was not the case with carbon built up, right? And there is a question also on it, so I'm going to discuss this thing in detail during that question. Very interesting question it is. Anyway, so author is saying that leaded fuel, freon basically had harmful byproducts, and health risks of ethyl was recognized early, but long-term effects of carbon emission were not recognized in the early stages. Indeed, it is reasonable to see CFCs as a forerunner of the kind of threat we will most likely face in the coming decades, as it becomes increasingly possible for individuals or small groups to create new scientific advances. Oh, so author says that now the next threat is going to come from CFCs. And why that is the case? Because nowadays it is rather easy for any individual to come up with technology, biotechnology, material science or chemistry based innovations which can set off unintended wrong consequences which can reverberate on global scale. It's a nice passage, isn't it? So what's the overall idea that we are talking about? And if you would like to go through the recap for a moment, you can pause the video and just take a look at these pointers. All these pointers we have covered while we were discussing all these paragraphs, but just for a quick final review. So the overall idea, overall argument that author is trying to explore is that technological advancements often bring unintended consequences, both positive and negative, which have shaped the society and environment in unforeseen ways. Now let's take a look at the questions. We can assume that the author would support all of the following views except, which means what is it that author will not support? Okay, let's take a look at The options now. The byproducts of leaded fuel rather than the fuel itself were responsible for the buildup of carbon related gases in the atmosphere. Absolutely, author will support that. This is given in the passage. Author started with the idea of depositing carbon in atmosphere in para 4 and then talked about ethyl, that unintended consequences stemmed from this particular fuel, but not by the fuel itself, but by the waste products that they emit. That's absolutely correct. Now, because this is something that author will support, it will not be my answer. So, one is gone. Let's take a look at second. It has become far easier for people today to bring out innovations with dire worldwide consequences than it was earlier. Absolutely correct. Our last paragraph, which is I think paragraph 6, yes, talks about this thing that today it is increasingly possible, that means very easy, for people to create new scientific advances from biotechnology, chemicals and whatnot, which can set off unintended consequences that can reverberate on a global scale. So this is also something that author will support, so should not be my answer. Second is gone. Now let's talk about 3 and 4, and these are really interesting options. Option 3. While technological advances in the past have had innocuous or beneficial outcomes, more recent advances have the potential to be more threatening globally. Many times people think that this also will not be the answer because author will support it. Because if climate change is happening and because the advances are so rapid, then the potential of that would definitely be high and in a negative sense, but that's not the case. Author nowhere in the passage said that nowadays whatever technological advances are going to happen will have more threatening impact. Let's take a very simple example. Let's say today I create a particular solution which can be used as floor cleaner, phenyl. But that phenyl is sort of non-threatening to humans, but it works really well when it comes to cleaning the germs off. Now somebody used that for, say, elimination of mosquitoes as a mosquito repellent, right? And now people are not even using it as a floor cleaner anymore. This thing is coming in creams like Odomos, for example, or that thing is coming in sprays and whatnot. Highly non-toxic, really good. People can just set it off and sleep and nothing is going to happen to their body. Now that is also, let's say most of the African countries are using it. Isn't that an unintended consequence that is reverberating on a global scale, but it is beneficial? So it is not necessary, there is no comparative analysis as to whether the earlier unintended consequences were bad or the new ones are going to be bad. We don't know that so far. So we cannot conclusively say that the new ones are going to be more threatening, and hence this is something author will not support. So this should be the answer. Now another option, which is option number 4, is also confusing. Let's take a look at that option. It says the emissions caused by the large-scale use of leaded fuel ought to have been addressed earlier than they were. Now this option requires a bit of thought. Author says that in para 5 that unintended consequences of ethyl stemmed from its byproducts. So far so good. Now in the same paragraph, author says that in 1920s, take a look at this, in the 1920s, unlike the long-term effects of carbon dioxide, the effects or the potential health risk of ethyl were visible. What is the meaning of it? Author says that the potential harm of these things were visible, but potential harm of carbon built-up was not visible. So author wants to focus on the fact now that for the carbon built-up, we did not know the possible threats, and now we have to deal with that today in whatever manner it has come up. But as far as ethyl is concerned, we knew it, but still we did not do anything about it. So that is an opportunity missed. And that is what we have to think about in this passage. So this requires a bit of thought, more thought, because it is an implied idea. So when author says that it should have been addressed earlier, definitely. Otherwise, why would author even bring up this idea that unlike the threat that we are facing today, whose potential effects were not even visible, we knew the potential effect of ethyl. But still that created the problem, na? So if those were visible, but still the problem happened, that means we did not address that. But in case of carbon-based emissions, We were not even aware of these threats. So dealing with that thing is our majburi. But for that, it was not our majburi. It was not a foundation on us, right? So that is an interesting thing, which means this is also something author would agree with, and hence fourth will not be the answer. So my final answer is option number 3. The author lists all of the following examples as externalities of major technical advances except. What are externalities in the passage? Externalities are the unintended consequences that stemmed from any major innovation. Author says, which is not the example of externality given in the passage. So what are the examples of externalities mentioned in the passage? Spectacles, microscopes, lenses, right? From what? From printing press. Setting up of townships because of air conditioning that was supposed to be used only for industrial, say, drying or cooling. Musical recordings, it is also an externality which came from phonograph, which was ideally meant for dictation. Programmable loom, that is also an externality. How did that come into being? Those animatronic dolls that were made by Jacquard led to programmable loom. And the entire programming revolution from this Charles Babbage's computer, that is also an externality. So I'm talking about externality, and then I'm also talking about the technological advances it stemmed from, so that you can just connect it with what you have read so far. CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, that is another externality basically, because it is going to lead to various other consequences. So now let's take a look at the options. Extension of the phonograph to large scale recording of music. Yes, this is the unintended consequence of phonograph given in the passage, point number 3. So not the answer. Second, built up of chlorofluorocarbons in the atmosphere. So this is also given in the last bullet point. That is also an externality, not my answer. Application of the Jacquard loom to modern IT programming. Yes, the use of Jacquard loom in terms of modern IT programming, that is also given in bullet point number 4. So this also will not be the answer. Cooling and dehumidifying of factories through air conditioning. Now this was not an unintended consequence. This was the actual reason why air conditioner was developed by Carrier. And author is asking about unintended consequences, which means externalities. Many times people remove this also from their consideration set, thinking that this is given in the passage. My dear, you are not supposed to pick the answer that is just given in the passage. You have to pick up the answer which is the answer of the question. So fourth is not an externality and hence the answer. In fact, externality of that is creation of cities in hot arid regions, which otherwise would not have been possible if air condition had not been here. Carrier, Babbage and Edison are mentioned in the passage to illustrate the author's point that, so why author has talked about these people, Carrier, Babbage and Edison? Let's take a look at that. In the passage, author mentions these people in the paragraph where he says that they solved a problem through some innovation. For example, when dictation taking was required, so Edison created phonograph. But these led to unintended consequences which were beneficial, and not because they wanted to use them in a different way. Some other people use these things in a different manner. They were not even aware of it. They had no clue of it, which means the original inventors could never ever imagine the power of their inventions beyond the use that they intended. This is what is the reason of why Edison, Babbage and Carrier have been mentioned here. Now let's take a look at the options and we'll see which option captures this point in the most clear manner. Let's start with option number 1. The secondary effect of past inventions mostly resulted in the creation of new inventions. The example of Edison, Babbage, Carrier is to show that they had no clue about how their inventions could be used in a different and disruptive way. Option does not talk about it, so this is not the answer. Despite the original intention, the unintended consequences of their inventions were largely beneficial. Yes, unintended consequences were beneficial, but again, the intent of showing the examples of these people is to show that they had no clue about what the use of their product is going to be. So not my answer. Third, These inventors could not have visualized the eventual impact of their inventions on the society. Bang on. यही तो reason है. That is why author has given the example of these people, that they could not even think, they could not have even visualized what their invention would result into. So let's say, the coding behind this specific engine that on which you are currently viewing me. Now that coding is done in a particular language, it has been compiled on a compiler. All these things started from, say, Charles Babbage's idea of programming or whatever. That guy might not have thought of this thing. Okay. So third should be the answer. What about fourth? Inventions typically end up being used for entirely different purposes than the intended ones. No. This basically means that whatever you invent, it will not be used for its initial purpose, but will be used for some other purpose. No, not necessary. The intent of the author is not to basically show you that. So this also will not be my answer, and hence my answer will be option number 3. Which of the following best conveys the main point of the first paragraph? Okay, what is the first paragraph? The argument of first paragraph is that technological advancements that have happened have often led to unintentional results, unintentional consequences which can be beneficial or harmful. And there was an example given of printing press. So what is the main point of it? Basically, if you invent something, it will have long-term and far-reaching consequences. That is why author has talked about it now. Chalo. So let's take a look at the options, and whichever option is closest to this idea should be my answer. First, the entire impact of a technological advance should be evaluated by the boost its secondary effects gives to generating further technological advances. Absolutely not. Intent of para 1 is not to state that one should judge a technological invention on the basis of what it can do for future inventions. No, the passage is not about judging the future capability of any invention. It is only stating that your invention, say, of coming up with a chopping board. Now listen to this carefully. Your invention of coming up with a chopping board might lead to something more than that. For example, it might lead to a fall in the sale of moisturizing cream, because now you are not cutting vegetables with the help of your hands. Tuck, 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 tuck. So your thumb is not getting bruised, so you do not need a moisturizing cream for that anymore. Right? So that's what I'm talking about. So it is just stating that, your invention can have unintended consequences. First option is not talking about it, so not my answer. Second, the full impact of technological advances cannot be estimated in the short run, as the ripple effects often extend far beyond the original intent. Okay? Yes, that is the answer. This is what is mentioned in the shadow answer also, that full impact of any innovation cannot be seen in the short run. It will be seen in the long run because it will have unintended consequences. Third, it is important to judge an invention not by its immediate outcomes, but by the holistic impact of the secondary effects. This option also talks about how we should judge an innovation. So that is also not the intent of para 1, and hence not my answer. So gone. Fourth, the secondary effects of most major technological advances in the past, especially if they were unintended, have turned out to be beneficial. Again, not the intent we discussed in the shadow answer. So this also is wrong. So always remember, you have to answer the question. So my answer is option number 2. This is the passage on human-carnivore attacks. Let's begin. There are 3 other common drivers for carnivore-human attacks, some of which are more preventable than the others. Okay. When I read the very first line, what do I get to know? That the passage is about human-carnivore attack. Human-carnivore, that means when humans attack carnivores or when carnivores attack humans. And author says that there are 3 other common drivers which are more preventable than others. So maybe this is more about identifying the real causes of human-carnivore effect and what can we do to prevent them. Now let's see if our anticipation is true. Let's read further. Natural aggression-based conflicts, such as those involving females protecting their young or animals protecting a food source, can often be avoided as long as people stay away from those animals and their food. Carnivores that recognize humans as a means to get food is a different story. So author says that one thing is natural aggression-based conflict. So if people really do not go closer to these animals, then animals will not attack them, thinking that humans may possibly do something wrong with their puppies. Another thing author says that carnivores that recognize humans as a means of food, they become more reliant on human food. So if you make them more reliant on you, then they would want to come to you more often. If animals come to you more often, then the possibility of such attacks would also increase. Now, that's a very simple statistical idea. So author says this is also one of the reasons that if you give them, food, so the bhalu there will think that, okay, I have to go to this guy will give me some, food and so on. And that's what author is saying. And then author finally says that predatory or predation related attacks are quite rare. Only 17% of such attacks were there, which means carnivores do not really think of humans as a source of their food, in the sense that humans are not their food. So there is no predatory attack. Okay. So these attacks basically are happening from some other reasons. What are those other reasons? One is that humans are meddling with them, or they're coming way too closer. The other thing, of course, is when you give them food and so forth. So what is this passage about? We are talking about human-carnivore conflict, and if I have to be a bit more precise, I would say preventing human-carnivore conflict. And the argument that I'm trying to explore here is that carnivore-human attacks can be prevented by avoiding natural aggression conflicts. And carnivores, when they rely on humans for food, then they lose that instinctive fear of humans, which can increase the possibility of such conflict. However, the possibility of predatory attacks is rare. Let's go further. Then there are animal attacks provoked by people taking pictures with them or feeding them in natural settings, such as national parks, which often end with animals being euthanized out of precaution. Another reason author is giving, which is basically an extension of a previous reason, that if you go closer to the animals. In this case, author is saying that if you feed them in natural setting, or you take picture with them in natural setting means the way they are in their natural habitat. So currently, I'm recording this thing, and suddenly I see that there is a lion in front of me and I'm in a jungle. Then I would say that, okay, let's do a selfie, come lion, come, like that, then there is a possibility that lion might attack. So author says that when you do these things in natural settings, then of course there is a possibility of animal attack, and eventually that animal becomes habituated to people, and then bad things happen to the animal. And the folks who initially wanted to make the connection don't necessarily realize that. Basically, author is just talking about this idea that if you feed or photograph animals in a natural setting which can habituate them, then of course this is going to lead to more conflicts, and it is also not good for the animals. After conducting countless postmortems on all types of carnivore-human attacks spanning 75 years, Penteriani's team believes 50% could have been avoided if humans reacted differently. So here author basically gives a significant number. Author says that if humans basically reacted differently, if they change their some sort of habits, 50% of such attacks could be prevented easily. And then this guy says that what is it that humans are doing which is causing these attacks, so that you can get to know what is it that they should not do. So Penteriani says that there is something called as risky behavior. What is risky behavior? One, parents leaving children to play outside unattended, or walking an unleashed dog. So a coyote might take a look at that dog and say that, okay, I want to eat that dog, especially when you are near the habitat of such carnivores. So that is a risky behavior. How you can deal with that? Do not leave your kids unattended. Do not keep your dogs on, keep your dogs on the leash. And then there is another guy called Wilkinson. He says 66% of coyote attacks involve a dog. People end up in situation where the dog is being chased or a dog chases a coyote. Basically, this just points out to that idea that if you are not careful as a human, then the possibility of attack is very high. But if you are careful, significant portion of those attacks can be avoided. Experts believe climate change also plays a part in the escalation of human-carnivore conflicts, but the correlation still needs to be ironed out. Okay, so experts believe that climate change also has some role to play in this heightened human-carnivore conflict, but the correlation still needs to be ironed out. Whether this correlation is true or not, that has to still be thought of, proven. As finite resources become scarcer, carnivores and people are coming into more frequent contact, which means more conflict would occur. For example, she says there was an uptick in lion attacks in Western India during a drought when lions and people were relying on same water sources. So author gives another example that if there is a conflict on shared resources, then of course you are going to bring carnivores and humans closer in that sense, and then the possibility of such attacks would rise. So basically the suggestion is that climate change also increases human carnivore conflict because the resources will be scarcer, and if you are using them along with the animals, then there can be a conflict. But this line is interesting. The correlation needs to be ironed out, which we'll be talking about later in another question. The likelihood of human carnivore conflicts appear to be higher in areas of low income countries dominated by vast rural landscape and farmland. According to Pentaniani's research, there are a lot of working landscapes in global south that are really heterogeneous, that are interspersed with carnivore habitats. Author is saying that there are some places, especially if I talk about rural landscape in low income countries. So what is happening in these countries that they are really heterogeneous. Heterogeneous means that humans are also living in the same space, animals are also living in the same space. And of course, this is going to increase the opportunity of animal human encounter statistically, right? So this is also one of the reasons author is saying that human carnivore conflicts can happen when you are sharing the landscape. So let's take a look at the overall idea. Overall idea is very simple. Human carnivore conflicts happen due to risky human behavior, environmental changes, and habitat overlap. This is what the passage is about. Very simple to read. Let's now take a look at the questions. According to the passage, which of the following scenarios would most likely exacerbate the frequency of carnivore human conflict? Okay, which will most likely exacerbate? Exacerbate means to worsen, खराब कर देगा. Which will worsen human carnivore conflict? Let's take a look at that. Everything author says that causes human carnivore conflict, if you keep on doing that, that is going to worsen it. So if I talk about risky human actions like leaving your children or dogs unattended, that is definitely one of the reasons which can worsen the human carnivore conflict if you do that more often. Feeding or taking pictures with wild animal in natural setting can also do that. If animals are reliant on humans for the food, which can also lead to more interaction of animals with humans, and thus statistically the possibility of such conflicts would increase. Climate change, okay, so that is also going to impact, especially when there is scarcity of shared resources. Low income areas where wildlife and humans share the same landscape, if that happens more frequently, then also that will exacerbate the frequency of human carnivore conflicts. So let's take a look at the options and see which option is the right one. Let's start with the first one. Implementing food waste management strategies to prevent wild animals being attracted to human food sources. Yeah, now see, when author asks you what is most likely going to exacerbate something, that's an application question. You have to think all of them as true and then decide which works on the basis of information given in the passage. So author says if you implement food waste management strategies to prevent wild animals. Basically, this reduces human-carnivore interaction by preventing animals, because now they are not getting attracted to human food. Na? So, of course, this will resolve the conflict. It is not going to worsen the conflict. So, it's not going to be my answer. One is gone. Second, addressing the impact of climate change on the availability of resources for wildlife. Now, this addresses the climate change based human carnivore conflict. If you are addressing the human carnivore conflict that is happening because of climate change, then also it is resolving the problem. So, it is not going to exacerbate the situation. So, not my answer. Third, attempting to photograph wild animals from within secured viewing areas in national parks and protected zones. That's correct. If you are attempting to photograph wild animals from within the secured zones, then conflict will not happen, because these are secured zones. National parks have already designated these zones for you so that you can take pictures. You are not taking pictures in natural setting. If you are not taking picture in natural setting but in a controlled environment, it is not going to cause such conflict. So it will not exacerbate frequency of human carnivore conflict. So this also will not be the answer. Now, many times what happens, students do not sort of think, or I would say sometimes they miss this idea that it is a differentiation between secured zones and natural habitat or natural zone, natural setting. We just read it cursorily, so we think that this is going to exacerbate. No, it's not going to exacerbate. Fourth, unleashing dogs by pet owners in areas with known high concentration of large carnivores. Now, if you unleash your dogs in those areas where there are more carnivores, it's like you're saying that, hey, my dog, I do not put you on leash, ja bhag us coyote ko pakad. Go catch that coyote. Or, maybe a coyote will think that, oh, yummy, I'm going to eat that. You are exacerbating that conflict. Acha, now this option also has an interesting idea. Sometimes people do think that eventually if it is coyote chasing a dog, how is it a human carnivore conflict? So here human carnivore conflict is not about a human and carnivore in close conflict. It is about the things that are related to humans. So when you put your dog on leash, or when you remove your dog on leash, it is still your dog. So when they are attacking your dog, it is basically that they are attacking on you. So sometimes when we overthink, we then skip this option, but that's not the case. So this is the thing which is going to exacerbate the frequency of human carnivore conflicts, definitely, and that also is in line with the passage, and hence it should be my answer. Given the insights provided by Penteriani's research and Wilkinson's statement, which of the following conclusions can be drawn about the relationship between landscape heterogeneity and human carnivore conflict? All right, very simple. Penteriani's comments, let's take a look at that. He says that when landscapes are shared, then you would see that there are going to be more attacks. Wilkinson is talking about this thing that there are some risky behavior. If you basically do such risky behavior in those places where there is high concentration of carnivores, then you are prone to attack. So what's the implication? Author basically is trying to say that in a shared landscape, heterogeneous landscape, the possibility of human carnivore conflict is high. Now let's take a look at the options. The diversity and interspersion of working landscapes with carnivore habitats in rural areas increase the statistical probability of encounters between humans and carnivores. Dekho, any option that states that in heterogeneous landscapes there is a possibility of human carnivore conflict, high possibility should be the answer. This option states that in shared landscape, the possibility of human carnivore conflict is higher. So this is the right answer because this aligns with my shadow answer. Let's take a look at option number 2. Homogeneous landscapes with uniform agricultural practices are more likely to experience high rates of conflicts. No, Author does not say that homogeneous landscapes experience high rate of such conflicts. Heterogeneous landscapes do. So this is wrong, not my answer. Third, homogeneous basically means that either humans are only living or just the animals are living in that place. Okay, there is no heterogeneity. Low-income countries with vast contiguous wilderness areas are less prone to human-carnivore conflict because these areas lack the human presence necessary for such encounters. Penteriani's conclusion is that in low-income countries, there are more conflicts between carnivores and humans. Option says the opposite. So, that's not my answer. Fourth, landscape heterogeneity characterized by a mix of farmland and natural habitat inherently reduces the chances of human-carnivore conflicts by providing more refuge for wildlife away from human activity. This option says that landscape heterogeneity reduces the chances of conflict. Penteriani says it increases. So this is incorrect information. Again, not going to be my answer. So my answer is 1. According to the passage, what is the significant factor that contributes to the habituation of carnivores to human presence? What is a significant factor? What contributes to animals becoming habitual to human presence is basically the question. Answer is given. In para 2, author says, when carnivores think of humans as a means to get food, then they become more reliant on them and hence become less avoidant of humans, and hence this reduces, or rather, they lose that fear of humans, and in that case, of course, they will be more in connection with humans, which can result into an altercation or a conflict. Chaliye, let's take a look at the options and see which option talks about the fact that when fear of human goes away, they come closer to humans. That causes more chances of conflict. First, the increased scarcity of resources due to climate change, forcing carnivores to venture outside their natural habitats in search of sustenance. This is not the reason of how animals become habitual to human presence, so this is not the answer. Simple. Second, the reduction in carnivores is instinctive fear response resulting from their reliance upon human-provided food. This option states that lack of fear causes the carnivores to come in more frequent contact with humans. What does our shadow answer say? Same thing. So this is going to be the answer. What about third? The natural aggression exhibited by carnivores exacerbated by human interference, particularly when they are safeguarding their offspring or food sources. This option states that if there is a natural aggression which is exhibited by carnivores, especially when they are safeguarding their offsprings and their food source, this will lead to more habituation with humans. Now, this does not really make any sense. Why? Why would aggression of carnivores and possibility of attack would bring carnivores closer with humans? Or why would humans want to be in the same habitat with them? So this also will not be the answer, because my option says that this natural aggression exhibited by carnivores, particularly when they are safeguarding their offspring, contributes to habituation. No, it cannot. It's like you becoming khatron ke khiladi. So third is gone. Fourth, the predatory perception of humans as potential prey within the carnivore's food chain. This is not mentioned anywhere in the passage, that animals think of humans as their food. In fact, author says that predatory attacks are minimal. So this will not really increase the habituation of carnivores to humans. So this will also not be the answer. So my answer is option number 2. Which of the following statements, if false, would be inconsistent with the concerns raised in the passage regarding the drivers of human-carnivore conflict? Which of the following statement, if false, would be inconsistent? That means which of the following statement, if true, would be consistent? Basically, which of the following is true according to the concerns raised in the passage. Now let's take a look at the options. This is a wonderful question. Take a look at that carefully. Carnivores lose their instinctive fear of humans when consistently exposed to human food sources. Yes, this is what author has mentioned in the passage, that carnivores lose their instinctive fear of humans. They lose it when they are exposed to human food sources. So this is true according to the passage when we talk about the drivers of carnivore human conflict. So this should be the answer. But the interesting thing is that the answer key provided by CAT authorities, as far as the response sheet is concerned, as on the date when we are recording it, this is not the answer which is given there. The answer is something else. Now I'm going to give you a counter thought also. Carnivores lose their instinctive fear of humans. Author says that definitely when they become reliant on human food, then they become less avoidant of humans. They may lose the instinctive fear of instinctive fear of humans, etc. But maybe here the word lose means that the fear totally goes away. But when author mentions this thing in the passage, the author is just trying to focus on the fact that the fear basically gets reduced. Although that is not a very strong justification, but I'm just giving you a counter thought as to why this might not be the answer. But so far, this definitely should be a better answer. Now let's take a look at option number 2. Human efforts to avoid risky behavior around large carnivores have proven effective in reducing conflict incidents. Human efforts to avoid risky behavior have proven effective. We don't have any information on that so far. And for that matter, this is not even a concern with respect to the driver of human carnivore conflict. Avoiding risky behavior cannot be the driver of the conflict. So second to definitely will not be the answer. Third, climate change has had negligible effects on the frequency of carnivore-human interaction in affected regions. Now this is the answer which has been given by CAT authorities according to the response sheet. Now a justification for that could be that when author says that climate change has had negligible effect on frequency of carnivore-human conflict, this is coming from that paragraph in which it was mentioned that climate change also has a role to play in causing human carnivore conflict. But the correlation needs to be ironed out. This is the sentence which is given. You can go back to that paragraph and check that out. Correlation needs to be ironed out. That means the exact truth, whether this claim is true or not, we so far don't know. We need to iron it out. We need to check that. We need to verify that. If that is the case, that simply either could mean that people are saying that climate has some impact on it, but that there is no impact as such. With that idea in mind, I can probably say that it had negligible effect on the frequency of human carnivore interactions. But my dear, when the passage says that climate change has some effect, but the correlation needs to be ironed out, maybe the correlation is true. So on some basis, experts might have said that even if the correlation has not yet been fully ironed out, I can still not conclusively say that it had negligible effect. It might have had negligible effect, it might not have had negligible effect. So we don't know. This is our justification of why this should not be the answer. But this is one of the options which can really confuse. Let's take a look at fourth. Predatory attacks by carnivores are a common occurrence. No, they are not common occurrence. In fact, author focuses on this idea that predatory attacks are rare. So this is definitely wrong. So the given answer is 3. The answer that we believe should be 1. 5 jumbled sentences are there. We have to find the odd one out. So let's find out the theme of each sentence, and whichever doesn't fall in the broader theme of things, so that will be our odd one out. Let's take a look at this. No real researcher of human behavior would say that gender is all nature or all nurture. Okay, so here I'm talking about what is gender. Basically, author is saying that no real researcher will go in either direction, won't say that gender is something which is an absolutely natural thing or it is an absolutely nurturable or a social thing, right? So basically we are trying to find out what is gender as far as the general theme is concerned. Second, the evidence for a biological basis for gender certainly doesn't mean that we should be complacent in the face of sexism. This talks about how biological evidence should not lead to complacency about sexism. Basically, if there is an evidence for biological basis of gender, that does not mean that we should start becoming complacent when we face sexism. So that's one little idea that is being talked about here. So okay. Third, many people are uncomfortable with the idea that gender is not purely a social construct. Here I am talking about whether gender is a social construct or not. Now this might be related with first one, because first also says the same thing, that a true researcher would not say that gender is absolutely a social thing or absolutely a nature thing. And this also says that many people are uncomfortable with the idea that gender is not purely a social construct, which means gender definitely has some social element to it, but gender also does have a nature or a natural element to it. So definitely we are talking about what is gender. And if 1 and 3 seem to be connected in some way, then none of them can be odd one out, which means so far my broader theme is coming to be finding out what is gender. And what is gender in terms of whether it is nature or nurture. Okay. Fourth, despite this empirical truth, researchers who study the biological basis of gender often face political pushback. Despite this empirical truth, which empirical truth? The fact that gender also has a biological component to it. But even if, so we know this thing, but still author is saying that the researchers who study this thing, they get a political pushback, again related to the idea of what is gender, whether it is biological or not. There is a political preference for gender to be only a reflection of social factors and so entirely malleable. This also focuses on the ongoing debate or rift or conflict or a concern whether gender is social or not. So some people say this is only social, some people say that it is not, and there is a rift going on. So my broader theme of discussion is that whether gender is a social construct or not. And then we have a sentence, which is my sentence number 2, which focuses on a different topic. What is that different topic? That if we have a biological evidence of sexism, what it should lead to or should not lead to. Maybe a far-reaching implication of the biological knowledge of gender. But my discussion is not about how you should treat sexism. My discussion is about what is gender. And hence, second is the odd one out. Here is our first paragraph. The job of a peer reviewer is thankless. Okay. Seems like passage is about peer review or the thanklessness of the job called peer reviewer. So what that might be about? The moment we read the very first line, we have to think about a couple of active questions. So it could be that, why peer reviewers are reviewing whatever they are reviewing, why it is a thankless job. If it is a thankless job, why they are still doing it? What are the advantages that that they have of that? Or if there are certain concerns, then how these concerns are mitigated. More or less, I believe that this should be the idea. And every time you are also reading a passage and you are reading the first line, second line, think about a couple of questions. Now let's see if this passage is actually about peer reviewing and if some of these or most of these questions are sort of and answered. Let's go further. Collectively, academics spend around 70 million hours every year evaluating each other's manuscripts on behalf of scholarly journals. Okay. So far it is about the peer review that I'm talking about. And they usually receive no monetary compensation and little, if any, recognition for their effort. So why it is a thankless job? Because they do not receive any money for doing that. They also do not receive a lot of appreciation for that. No recognition as such. Appreciation should of course be part of recognition. So why do these people do it? The answer is given after that. Some of them do it as a way to keep abreast with developments in their field. So one reason is that they want to just be updated with whatever is happening in their field. For example, if somebody uh, has a doctorate in one of the subjects in sociology and another paper comes up in sociology, then that person will peer review that. For one reason is that, from an outside eye, that person will be able to provide a great perspective on how the paper has been written and whatnot. On the other hand, that guy will also think about, okay, this is something new which I can fit in my repertoire. So basically the idea is that one reason why they are doing it is that they want to keep themselves abreast with the new developments that are happening in their fields. And some people, of course, see it as a duty of their discipline. Ye hamara uttardayitva hai, we have to do that. So either way, academic publishing would likely crumble without them. So it's an important thing. Peer reviewing is definitely an important thing. So the passage so far seems to be about the unseen role of peer reviewers. And the argument that we are trying to explore here is that they dedicate their time to do peer review out of duty or to stay updated in their field, despite having no recognition or monetary compensation for that. Let's go further. In recent years, some scientists have begun posting their reviews online, mainly to claim credit for their work. So far, there was something called as peer review. And it was more or less a thankless job for whatever reasons we discussed. But now author says something is changing now. In recent years, some scientists have begun posting their reviews online. So if this has happened in recent years, that means earlier, peer reviewing did not involve publishing their reviews publicly. Okay, so but now scientists have begun posting the reviews online. Why? One reason is given here so that they can claim credit for their work. That means we did the peer review. So one part is sort of sorted, that earlier they were not getting any recognition of any sort, but when they here publicize the reviews, so they can claim the credit for their work. Of course, if I review a particular manuscript and I then publish my reviews, then who published it? I published it. So then somebody will say that, yes, Ashish Chugh is the reviewer of this particular post. Oh, he did a great job. He's providing these kind of reviews or critique for that matter. Sites like Publons allow researchers to either share entire referee reports or simply list the journals for whom they have carried out a review. Just gives an example of that particular site where this can be done. The rise of Publons suggests that academics are increasingly placing value on the work of peer review and asking others to do the same. So rise of Publons basically shows that academics actually think that peer review is a valuable work, and people should do that. While that is vital in publish or perish culture of academia, there is also an immense value in data underlying peer review. Sharing peer review data could help journals stamp out fraud, inefficiency, and systemic bias in academic publishing. So basically, this portion of the passage focuses on the benefits of sharing the peer review data. Earlier, you were not sharing it, you were just reviewing it, and then maybe to that specific journal or some authorities you shared it. But in the open, when you share that when I say that sharing peer review data, it means sharing that in the open. So sharing peer review data in the open basically can help churn out fraud, inefficiencies, and bias. Now, an interesting question that arises here is, definitely some benefits have been given here of open publishing of peer review data, but then how open publishing of peer review data can help eradicate or deal with, at least, or stamp out fraud, inefficiency, and systemic bias? What type of bias we are talking about? So many questions arise. Ideally, author should answer all these questions. Let's see if author does. And actually, author does in the subsequent paragraph. Peer review data could also help root out bias. What type of bias? Again, so far we don't know. Last year, a study based on peer review data for nearly 24,000 submissions found that Westerners, women and non-Westerners, were vastly underrepresented among peer reviewers. So this is one bias. That means the people who are peer reviewing or the peer reviewers come from a specific, say, type of gender or specific region, which means most of the people who are peer reviewing are either males or Westerners. And that's why we are able to find this out now, that women and non-Westerners were vastly underrepresented. So one idea is sorted here. Only one in every 5 reviewers was failed. Okay, this is just some data. And then author says openly publishing peer review data could perhaps also help journals address another problem in academic publishing, which is fraudulent peer reviews. How fraudulent peer reviews can happen and how this is going to deal with that. Very interesting. Author then says, for instance, a minority of authors have been known to use phony email addresses to pose as an outside expert and review their own manuscripts. This is the fraud. So if I write a paper today on any topic, maybe I come up with a technology which can further intensify or further can expand the data that I can keep in a chip of size of, say, my thumb tip, or nail tip. I'm just giving you something. And if I want to review it, if I want somebody to review, but what would I do? I would maybe use another email and would then make a profile as an expert reviewer on microelectronics, and then I will review it. Now that's a fraud. Now how can I review my own thing? Review is meant to be done by some others. So author says that when you share this data openly, then this can help deal with such fraud as well. Now the next paragraph is quite interesting. Here, so far we have talked about the benefits of peer review. Now this is talking about what are not the benefits of sharing this open review. Earlier, that was the set of benefits for sharing the open review. Now here, opponents of open peer review commonly argue that confidentiality is vital to the integrity of review process. Okay. Opponents of peer review, open peer review. So there are some people who think that open peer review is not a good idea. Why do they say so? For them, first reason is that confidentiality might be compromised because it is vital to the integrity of review process. Referees may be less critical of manuscripts if their reports are published, especially if they are revealing their identities by signing them. So this is another case that, for example, again, if Gaurav publishes something and then I have to review it, as long as I am reviewing anonymously, then I can be as critical as I want to be. But if I publish it with my name, reviewed by Ashish Chugh, then I can't be very critical because now my identity is revealed. So there can be various things, Gaurav can come up to me and then can fight with me and say, how can you say all these things? Maybe some other people would want to demean me. Oh, really, better than Mr. Gaurav, who is an established guy in his field, and so and so. The point is that when my identity is revealed, there is a good chance that I might not be as critical as I want to be. So this is another demerit of open peer review publishing. Then author says some also hold concerns that open reviewing may deter reviewers from agreeing to judge the manuscripts in the first place. For example, I do not want my name to come out for whatever reason, then I would not even want to judge it. If I don't want to do peer review, then the entire concept of peer reviewing goes for a toss if open peer reviewing is happening. Or that they will take longer to do so out of fear of scrutiny. Acha, usne kaise bol diya? How this guy said this thing about this manuscript. On what basis he has critiqued. So my scrutiny can also happen. So all these can be the reasons which are enough for the opponents of open peer review. So in this case, we have talked about the possible demerits of the process. In the earlier case, we talked about the possible merits of the process of open peer review. Now I want you to stop here for a moment and think. The passage so far has discussed pros and cons both. Now it is imperative to know what author is inclined towards. Is he inclined towards open peer reviewing, or is he towards not open peer reviewing, or he is somewhere in the middle. Interesting, now? This is called active rating. That is what we are doing. And if we do it in this manner, nobody can defeat us when it comes to RC. So let's do it. Even when content of reviews and the identity of reviewers can't be shared publicly, perhaps journals could share the data with outside researchers for study. Okay? Or they could release other figures that would not compromise the anonymity of reviews, but that might answer important questions about how long the reviewing process takes, etc., etc. So what stance author is taking here? Author is taking, a middle ground. Author says that peer review data, I'm in for peer review data sharing, but wherever it should not be shared publicly, or you have to keep things anonymous, you should keep it. You have to ensure efficiency and you have to ensure fairness. That is the most important thing. So basically, this portion provides the solution to address the concerns of the opponents of open peer review. Okay, very nice. Of course, opening up data underlying reviewing process will not fix peer review entirely, and there may be instances in which there are valid reasons to keep the content of peer reviews hidden and the identity of the reviews confidential. But the norm should shift from opacity in all cases to opacity only when necessary. This last line is quite important. Author says, I am not saying that all the concerns with respect to peer reviewing will be sorted, but opening up data is quite important. So he is slightly more in the favor of opening up data. That means it should be an open peer review. But author also then says that wherever there is a strong necessity to keep the information hidden, you keep that information hidden, but the norm should shift from opacity, that means non-transparency, to opacity only when necessary, to non-transparency when only necessary. That means in most of the cases it should be absolutely transparent, but if in certain cases it should not be, only then you can keep it opaque, otherwise not. And that's a great giveaway. So let's take a look at the overall idea that we are trying to explore here in the passage. Passage talks about the idea that peer review is crucial, and sharing review data anonymously can improve fairness, transparency, and efficiency while addressing concerns about confidentiality and academic publishing. But wherever it is necessary to keep the data in a non-shared format, that's okay. But in majority, you should share the data. And that's why we have kept the idea of open review as the major idea of the passage. Now let's take a look at the questions. Very interesting passage. According to the passage, which of the following is the only reason not given in favor of making peer review data public? Okay, which is not the reason. So let's try to find out the reasons which are given in favor of making peer data public. Whatever reasons that are given in the passage, if the same reasons come in the options, those options will not be my answer. So what are the reasons? Para 2 states that sharing peer review data can help stamp out fraud, inefficiency, and bias. Para 3 states that it can help in dealing with, of course it is the extension of the previous paragraph, but it specifically gives you the example of gender and racial bias. So that of course will be solved. Then another benefit is that when we talk about fraud here means that the writers of the manuscripts should not pose as their own reviewers by using phony email addresses. Now let's take a look at the options. Option number 1, which is not the reason. Okay, it can tackle the problem of selecting appropriately qualified reviewers for academic writing. Is it mentioned anywhere as a benefit that because of open peer review you will be able to select really good reviewers? Which means, so basically the meaning of option number 1 is that if you do open review, then you will get to know whether good peer reviewers are there or not, and who is a good peer reviewer. If you have to find out qualified reviewer only after they have reviewed and published something, then why are they even reviewing the manuscript in the first place? ये benefit थोड़ी है. This is not the benefit. In fact, this can come across as a demerit, because in a way you are judging the merit of a reviewer on the basis of his reviews, because now the identity is open. So this is not the benefit of open peer reviewing, and hence this should be the answer. Let's take a look at 2, 3 and 4 if these are the benefits which are given. It could address various inefficiencies and fraudulent practices that continue in academic publishing process. Yes, it will definitely address inefficiencies, frauds. This is mentioned as a benefit of open peer review, so this should not be the answer. Third, it will deal with peer review fraud such as authors publishing bogus reviews of their work. Yes, using phony emails to review their own work. That is publishing bogus reviews of your own work. So third also is one of the benefits, and hence it also should not be the answer. Fourth, it would highlight the gender and race biases currently existing in the selection of reviewers. Yeah. Earlier, people were not aware that most of the reviewers are Westerners or men. But suddenly, when open peer reviewing started to happen, then you got to know about that fact. And then you realize that, oh, there is a bias. Why not more women are in the peer review process? Why not more non-Westerners are in the peer review process? So, of course, when you get to know about inefficiencies like these, it can help you deal with that. So, definitely it would highlight. दिखाएगा तो सही, it will highlight ना. Oh, there is a bias. Huh? So fourth also is the benefit, and hence this also should not be the answer. My answer is option number 1. Very simple. You just had to be a bit more cognizant of what was mentioned in the passage, and that's all. According to the passage, some are opposed to making peer reviews public for all of the following reasons, except that it some are opposed. Some people are opposing the peer review publication for all the reasons except. That means whatever are their reasons to oppose peer review publishing should not be the answer. So why are they opposing it? Let's try to find out some reasons. Now, before going further, I just want to highlight an interesting thing. Take a look at the structure of this passage. This passage is quite simple in structure. It starts with a topic called peer reviewing, and then it talks about something called open peer review, and then it talks about the pros and cons of open peer review and the solution. That's all. In such cases where pros and cons are discussed, two sides of the coin are discussed, there is a good chance that you will get at least one or maybe both the questions, one for pro and one for con. And this is what we have seen here. Interesting, na? Let's take a look at the reasons why opponents oppose peer review data publication. First, they believe that it may result in loss of confidentiality. That is one reason which is given, right? Second reason is that they think that if we reveal the identities of reviewers, they might be hesitant to provide a critical feedback. The way, the level of critique they wanted to make, they might not do that, which is something we discussed when we were discussing the passage also. Other thing is that it might totally take somebody away from judging a manuscript. Somebody would say, no, if it is going to be published, then I'm not going to review that. Fear of scrutiny might lead reviewers to take more time while writing reviews, slowing down the process. That is also the reason. Because then, you think it will be scrutinized, so I have to be really more careful. So it is going to slow the process down. All right. So let's take a look at the options. First, it makes reviewers reluctant to review manuscripts, especially if these are critical of the submitted work. Yes, this is given in bullet point number 3. That if peer review data is published in public, then referees might not want to judge manuscripts because of this open reviewing. So this is one of the reasons why some people oppose peer review data publication, and hence this will not be my answer. Second, It leaves the reviewers unexposed to unwarranted and unjustified criticism or comments from others. Because the passage does not say that peer review data publication will not expose reviewers to unjustified criticism. But the option says that it will leave the reviewers unexposed. Unexposed, which means not exposed to unwarranted comments from others. This is not one of the reasons why some people are opposing peer reviewed. If at all, the possibility could be that reviewers might be exposed to such unwarranted criticism. So if I am currently reviewing somebody's work, I will be exposed to criticism by others as well. Hey, how did he make that comment? The big problem in this option is the word unwarranted. Many times when we read it quickly, we think of it as warranted. Sorry, the word is unexposed. But many times we think of it as exposed. And that is something which is mentioned. So we skip this option. And then we are stuck in a loop. So 2 should be the answer. But if there are some of you who took CAT or who took this as their mock, and if you also committed the same mistake, the important thing is that you got to be more aware. So this should be the answer. Let's take a look at option number 3. It delays the manuscript evaluation process as reviewers would take longer time to write their reviews. That's absolutely fine. This is given in our bullet point number 4. It discusses this issue that it may delay the peer review process if the data is published in public. So 3rd is also not going to be my answer. What about 4th? It deters reviewers from producing honest, if critical reviews that are vital to the sound publishing process. Yes. If you are being exposed, then you might not want to be as critical as you should be, and then you would not want to be honest, because honesty might again, come back biting to you. So 4th also is one of the reasons why people are opposing making peer data review public, which is given in our, I think, bullet point number 2. So that also will not be the answer. Hence, my answer is option number 2. Of the following, which are listed as the reasons why academics choose to review other scholars' work, except, that means what is the reason why academics would not review others' work, or whatever are the reasons why academics are reviewing others' work would not be the answer. Whatever way you want to understand it should be okay. So why academics do the peer review? The reasons are, first, they want to keep abreast with whatever is happening in their field. Okay, so development in their field. Second, they think that it is their academic duty to do that. Third, of course, is to claim the credit for their work. Now, this is something which you have to understand. It is not given in the very first paragraph. It is given in that space where the discussion on publons was given. That the rise of publons shows so and so. And people are doing that to claim credibility or claim recognition for their work. So this is also the reason why they are doing the peer review, because when they publish the peer review, then they are doing the peer review anyway. So all will be the reasons. Many times students just think about the first 2 reasons and do not consider the 3rd reason, and that also can cause this question to go wrong. Now let's take a look at the options. Option number 1. Some use this as an opportunity to publicize their own review work. This is definitely one of the reasons that they think is an opportunity to publicize their own work, which means basically when you are reviewing somebody's data, somebody's manuscript, and then you are also, publishing it, then you have this thought in mind that I want to say that, hey, I reviewed that particular journal or that particular article. So definitely for some of them, it is a great opportunity to publicize their own review work. Humne kiya. We did that. So this is one of the reasons, so it should not be the answer. What about second? It is seen as an opportunity to expand their influence in the academic community. Now see, this is not written anywhere in the passage that reviewers review the work so that they can expand their influence in the academic community. This definitely could be an after effect of it, but author does not mention this as the reason as to why they are doing the peer review. So you got to go by the book. You got to go by what is mentioned in the passage, not what you think could be. So this is definitely not one of the reasons given as to why academics choose to review others' work. This should be the answer. Let's go for option number 3. It helps them keep current with cutting edge ideas in their academic disciplines, which is basically another way of saying that they want to keep abreast with the new developments in their field, and that is definitely a very strong reason for anybody to do the peer review. So this also should not be the answer. Fourth, it is seen as a form of service to academic community. This is also simple, directly it is given that some of them see it as a duty toward their academic discipline. So this is also a form of service to their academic community, and hence this also will not be the answer. My answer will be 2. Based on the passage, we can infer that the author would most probably support. Okay, what author would most probably support? Overall, we can see that author is in favor of publishing peer reviews. But in that case also, he is not hell-bent on open publishing in every case. He just says that it has to be done in a selected manner. It definitely should focus on transparency, but it should also deal with the concerns. And how you would deal with those concerns? Wherever opacity is required, you do that. Let's take a look at the options. So author would most probably support option number 1, greater transparency across the peer review process in academic publishing. He would definitely support that. Greater transparency. Right now, there is not enough transparency, and that's why he is focusing on the idea that the norm should shift from opacity in all cases to opacity only when necessary. That means in majority of the cases, there should not be any opacity. There should be transparency. So 1 is a good option. It can definitely be the answer. I'm going to shortlist that. Let's see if any other option can be a better answer, or if I can eliminate 2, 3 and 4. Let's take a look at second. Second says publicizing peer review data rather than publication of actual reviews. No, this option focuses only on the fact that author would support publicizing peer review data. But our intent is that author would want to have as much transparency as possible in such a publication. So until an option categorically states that opacity should be reduced to the minimum, that won't be the answer. So this also is not a good option. I can very easily eliminate that. Third, more careful screening to ensure the recruitment of content familiar peer reviewers. Again, the intent of author behind the entire passage is not to find out the right people to do the peer review job. The intent of the author is to tell you that peer review should be as transparent as possible, which is not mentioned in third, and this also then should not be the answer. What about fourth? Preserving the anonymity of reviewers to protect them from criticism. If author is in favor of this thing, then basically author is more or less in favor of not keeping the transparency as much as possible, which is opposite to what author intends to do. So fourth also will not be the answer. Very easy. My answer is option number 1. Okay, so a main sentence is given which is missing. We have to find out where it should fit. Let's take a look at this main sentence for a moment. Science has officially crowned us superior to our early rising brethren. Okay, it is a good idea to just think about sentence for a moment. It can give you a hint before you go ahead and venture into the overall theme of the passage. So the main sentence is saying that science has officially crowned us as superior to the people who wake up early rising brethren. Who are us here, right? So we got to establish that before this sentence can come up. We also need to establish that some comparison is happening between us and some other people who are early risers. So again, this kind of thing should happen, and then only I can maybe put this sentence. So of course, us is the late night people, because if you are comparing yourself with the early risers, then you have to not be early risers, and there is no term which is called afternoon risers, so it's a late night people. Let's take a look at the paragraph. My fellow night owls, grab a strong cup of coffee and gather around. I have great news. Okay. For a long time, our kind has been unfairly maligned. No gap so far. It is going on in the right direction. There is the story built up is absolutely fine. That I have a great news. And what is that news? That hey, we were earlier unfairly maligned. We were stereotyped as lazy and undisciplined. We were told that we ought to be morning larks, etc., etc., etc. Now, however, we are having the last laugh. So we have one. Why are you having the last laugh? So definitely one will not be the answer. We are having the last laugh. Why we are having the last laugh? Maybe science has officially crowned us superior to our early rising brethren. So far it makes sense here, my main sentence. But let's read the sentence after it. It may be a tad more complicated than that. What may be a tad more complicated than that? This fact. Which means a good option for me should be 2. And then author says that it may be a tad more complicated than that. Then how it is more complicated should be explained later on. So once I have already established that science has officially crowned us superior to the early rising brethren, but it is a complicated thing to say, then you should explain why it is a complicated thing to say. And after that, this sentence cannot come. But we'll still read rest of the passage. A study published last week suggests that staying up late could be good for brain power. Is this study a thinly veiled PR exercise? So you are talking about study only, which means there is no gap in 3. 3 also will not be the answer. No, it is legit. Researcher led by academics at Imperial College studied data on more than so and so people. It also talks about the study that was discussed, which means there is no gap here as well. 4th also will not be the answer, which means blank 2 or option 2 as it was given in the exam is the answer. Now where is option 2 coming? Option 2 is coming in option number 4. It is not a right way to basically write option 2 in front of option 4. The better choice anyway would have been blank 2, but this is how CAT authorities gave, so that's why we have kept it. So option 2 is coming in option number 4 in the exam given, and hence my answer is option number 4, which is blank 2. Let's take a look at this sentence and see where it will fit. Yet, each day the flock produced eggs with calcareous shells, though they apparently had not ingested any calcium from land, which was entirely lacking in limestone. Again, before looking into the broader theme of the paragraph, it is a good idea to take a look at the sentence if it can give us some hint. Sentence uses a word called yet, which means some contrast is there. So, yet each day flock produced calcium cells without even eating any calcium. Now that is an interesting thing. Author is saying that there is a flock maybe of some birds. They are producing calcium shells, but they are not eating any calcium. So what is the hint? It's a mystery. Why flock is producing calcium shells without eating any calcium, right? So you got to build a narrative before coming to this mystery, right? And then maybe you can resolve the mystery also. Now let's take a look at the paragraph. Early in this century, a young Breton schoolboy who was preparing himself for a scientific career began to notice a strange fact about hens in his father's poultry yard. What is the strange fact? Will strange fact come with this thing, yet each day? Right? So, no. What is the strange thing? As they scratched the soil, they constantly seemed to be pecking at the specks of mica, a siliceous material dotting the ground. Now you are talking about the strange fact. What are they doing? When they scratch the soil, they realize that the flock are eating mica. Okay. No one could explain to Lewis Kevron why chickens selected the mica, or why each time a bird was killed for the family cooking, no trace of mica could be found in its gizzard. That's the mystery, na? You are eating mica, but mica is not there in you. Then you can say, there was no mica. Yet each day, flock produced eggs with calcareous shells. Makes sense? Now you are talking about the mystery. So initially you are saying that they were eating mica, but we got to know that when we cut them, no mica was there. Yet they were producing calcareous shells without even eating calcium. Mystery completed. It is a good idea to place it at third. And then finally, you're resolving the mystery. What is the resolution? That finally, Kevran finally established that chickens were transmuting one element into another. They're eating mica, then that is getting transmuted in them and it is becoming calcium. Very simple. Answer is blank 3. Blank 3 is coming in option number 1. Option 3. So answer is first. Here is our first paragraph. Spices were a global commodity centuries before European voyages. There was a complex chain of relations, yet consumers had little knowledge of producers and vice versa. The passage is about spices, spices trade, that it was a global community centuries before European voyages. So the passage could be about how the spices are connected with whatever Europeans did. It could also talk about that maybe Europeans might have thought of spices as something which is their cup of tea, but the trade was already established. But why author is talking about it? What is the intent of author? So far we are not clear on that, so we can't really find out a lot of questions. But there is one thing which is given here. Author says that there was a complex chain of relations, yet consumers had little knowledge of producers and vice versa. Understand the difference between little and a little. Little knowledge means practically no knowledge. It's a negatory term. A little means some knowledge. For example, and it is the same case with say few and a few. So for example, if somebody asks you, do you have a chocolate? And you say, I have a few, you can have. That means I have enough, I can share. But if somebody says, I have few chocolates, matlab I have limited chocolates or close to none, so I can't really share any chocolate with you. Similarly, little and a little. Little is negatory, a little, a bit. So consumer had little knowledge of producers and vice versa. Desire for spices helped fuel European colonial empires to create political, military and commercial networks under a single power. So spice definitely had significant contribution toward building European colonial empires. Okay, what the passage is about? Spice trade. And we can also join colonialism with it, because author has very specifically talked about the idea of European voyages, that spices were there before their voyages as well, and then it also helped in colonialism. So something related to that should be there. So what are we exploring here? That's European colonial empires thrived on this global spice trade, linking producers and consumers, but they had little knowledge. The consumers had little knowledge about how the spices are produced or how they are sourced. Historians know a fair amount about the supply of spices in Europe during the medieval period, the origins, method of transportation. So historians are aware of something related to spices, but they were not aware about the demand. Why go to such extraordinary efforts to procure expensive products from exotic lands? Still, demand was great enough to inspire the voyages of Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama, launching the first fateful wave of European colonialism. The author says historians were not aware of demand, how much demand was there, but we can definitely say that demand was enough that might have inspired the European colonialism to take place. So you are traveling from a far off place to say exotic lands, let's say India, for spices, and then you are making India your colony, which means spices must be a great deal. Let's go further. So why were spices so highly priced in Europe? Now we are coming to the reasons. So one widely disseminated explanation is that they covered the taste of spoiled meat. One is this. Then refrigeration was not available, and some hot spices have been shown to serve as antibacterial agent. So one thing is that to cover the taste of spoiled meat. The other is that if refrigeration is not available, so you have to preserve it. So they can also help you preserve the meat as an antibacterial agent. Salting, smoking, drying were other methods, okay. Then spices were also medical ingredients. That was also the reason why they were popular. And they were used as both medicines and condiments. Above all, it is about balancing the food's humoral properties and prevent disease. Most spices were hot and dry and so appropriate in sauces to counteract the moist and wet properties. So basically taste and to deal with any sort of bacteria which might attack your body. So spices can deal with that as well. So countless benefits of spices have been given, which can definitely tell us that this could have been a significant set of reasons to go for spice trade and hence colonialism. Where spices came from was known in a vague sense. Now this can be connected with first paragraph where author is saying that people had little knowledge about how they are produced and whatnot. Consumers had little knowledge about it. So this was known in a vague sense centuries before the voyages of Columbus. How vague? So author says that they thought East is something which is exotic and alluring. Medieval maps also placed India close to the earthly paradise as mentioned in the Garden of Eden as described in the Bible. So this is the vagueness of okay, these things can come only from exotic places, the earthly paradise, our place is not earthly paradise, so let's go to India to search for that earthly paradise where I can get spices. Then author also says that geographical knowledge also has a lot to do with the perception of spices. It's a perception, it is not the truth. And what were the perception of spices? Relative scarcity, why they are scarce, that means limited, and the reasons for their high prices. One thing is how pepper is harvested. So there is a lore which is given here, a story that pepper grew in India and it was guarded by snakes. So if you have to really get pepper, you have to burn the trees, so snakes would go underground and then you can take out the pepper. So this was one lore. But then author also says that okay, this lore is okay to explain black pepper, because when you burn them, the pepper might become sooty. But how would you explain white pepper or pink pepper for that matter, right? So these are some geographical ignorances which led to myths about spices scarcity. Now, of course, if you have to really get spices after fighting snakes, then it should be scarce. It cannot be abundantly available and it has to be pricey, which is given here. Otherwise, it would be very easy to harvest and anybody can go there. And there is a question also dedicated on it. Spices never had the enduring allure or power of gold and silver on a commercial scale, but the taste for spices did continue for a while beyond Middle Ages. So author says that of course, as far as if we compare this allure of spices with the allure of gold or tobacco, indigo, sugar, etc., that was not there, but they were still very much prized. So the passage is about spice trade and everything related to spice trade and European idea or colonialism. Now this passage is an interesting passage, very easy to read, but when we look into the questions of this passage, there are I think 2 or 3 application based questions. We'll take a look at that, and the options are quite close, and that makes this passage a bit more challenging. Otherwise this is an easy passage. Some of you might also have experienced that if you have already taken it as part of your CAT 2024 or as part of your previous year paper practice. So here is a quick recap, and this is the main idea, that spices, which are prized for both culinary and medicinal purposes, spurred European exploration and colonialism. Medieval perceptions of scarcity and exotic origins fueled the demand. Now when I say fueled the demand, definitely fueled the demand in the sense that there was a significant demand because of it. So many lores were attached to it, but it is not like only the exotic origins are fueling the demand. There are various reasons for that. Here is the question: If a trader brought white peppercorns from India to medieval Europe, all of the following are unlikely to happen except, which means what will likely to happen? Application question. This is not directly mentioned in the passage, so you have to infer, think about, deduce from the passage. So what is likely to happen if a trader brought white peppercorn from India to Europe? What is talked about white peppercorn? Author says that peppercorns, there is a lore which says that peppercorns are guarded by snakes. So you have to burn the trees, you have to remove the snakes, and then you can get the peppercorn. But this could be true for black peppercorn, but not for white peppercorn. Why did white peppercorn remain white even after burning of trees? So any answer that is related to the idea of this should be the case. And what is the idea? The implication is that this story is wrong. Simple. So if a trader brought white peppercorns from India, what is likely to happen? Let's take a look at that. The price of spices would decrease. Even if trader brought white peppercorns, that would not mean that spices are widely available. It would only mean that this particular story is not true, but that doesn't mean that spices are readily available. Okay. And if we cannot conclude that spices are widely available, how can I say that the prices would decrease? Price can only decrease if there is significant supply. We have no information on supply. So this will not be the answer. Second, medieval maps would be used as navigational aids. Acha. The meaning of this option is that, acha, oh, now that you have gotten the spices in India, as if people were waiting here, oh, this trader brought spices from India. Now I can use his map to go to India. Makes no sense. It's like, let's say you got an appliance from China. And now you are thinking, now I can also go to China to get that appliance. Makes no sense. Your job is done as a consumer. You got the appliance, your job is done. You might want to think about this thing if you want to, switch from being a consumer to, say, becoming a distributor. Right? But as a consumer, in general, if a trader brought white peppercorns to India, in general, people will not think, acha, now I can use his map as a navigational aid. Makes no sense. So this also will not be the answer. And that's why I said the options are quite interesting. Passage otherwise is easy. And that is the challenge. You really have to think. What about third? Pepper would no longer be considered exotic. Why not? It is coming from an exotic land. It's just that you are thinking that the story is not really matching. But if the story is not matching, that does not mean that the pepper is no longer exotic. The exotic element of spice is not because of the story of scarcity. The exotic element of the pepper is because India is considered exotic and alluring. Right? So as long as somebody has brought spices from India, it is spices from India. Wow. So third also is not the answer. Fourth, Europeans would doubt the story of pepper harvesting. Yes. I was thinking, acha, the peppers are extracted after burning of trees. Hey, these are white peppercorns. So I will not believe on that story. That's all. So fourth is something which is okay. Fourth is going to be my answer. In the context of the passage, which one of the following conclusions cannot be reached? What you cannot conclude. Okay. So let's take a look at the options and we'll circle back to these paragraphs that we have mentioned here. India was colonized for its spices and gold. Spices definitely fueled, or I would say contributed to colonization. It is given that there is a desire for spices which contributed toward that in para 1, but that does not mean that it was for spices that India was colonized. As if Europeans were just waiting. Oh, spices, you find that in India, let's colonize it. Nah. Spices fueled the colonization. Fueling the colonization means pushed. But whether spices were the sole reason or not, significant reason or not, we have no information on that. So this is something which I cannot conclude, and hence it should be the answer. What about second? Colonialism was motivated by the demand for spices. Yes, definitely spices motivated colonizers to colonize. They wanted spices. Basically, if one is true, two cannot be true. If two is true, then one cannot be true. Right? Colonialism was motivated. There was a motivation. There was a push. It was fueled by that. So second is a better conclusion anyway. If it is a good conclusion, then it is not my answer. What about third? The spice trade was a driver of colonial expansion. Same thing. It was a driver. Yes, I can infer that. Fourth, tobacco was more marketable than spices. That is also mentioned. Author says that spices cannot be compared to the allure that tobacco, sugar or whatever was given in that last paragraph. But still, it was significantly alluring. That means tobacco is more marketable than spices. So fourth also is something I can conclude, and hence it will also not be the answer. So my answer is option 1. It can be inferred that all of the following contributed to a decline in allure of spices except. What contributed to the decline in allure of spices? Question is, all of the following contributed to the decline except, which means what did not contribute. So let's find out what contributed to the decline, and whatever is not going to be part of that should be my answer. Lovely question, take a look at that. What would decline the allure of spices? Spices have some benefits. If you nullify those benefits, that will decline the allure. For example, if somebody says that eating this particular medicine is going to cure your cancer, very alluring. But the moment somebody says that this does not cure cancer, allure is gone. Let's take a look at what are the benefits of spices. Benefits are, one, cuisine based benefits. You can preserve your stuff. You can also use it as condiment. Other is it was used as medicine. If you nullify these things, your job is done. Let's take a look at the options. Increase in availability of spices. Acha. Question is, what did not contribute to a decline? Increase in availability of spices. Allure of spices is not because they are scarce. Allure of spices is because they have a utility. They can be used as a preservative, or they can be used as a medicine or as a condiment. So, when you are saying that increase in the availability of spices, we have no information in the passage that says that the moment people find more spices, they will not find them useful. So this cannot contribute to the decline in the spices. It is not attacking the benefits. Hone do increment. I can today see 100 grams of pepper. Tomorrow I see 1 kg of pepper. As long as it is medicinal and tasty for me, I'm going to take it. Right? So this does not contribute to the decline in allure, and hence this should be the answer. What about second? Changes in European cuisine. If there are changes in European cuisine, for example, if they don't want their meat or fish to be, say, dry anymore, if they don't want their meat to stay longer, for whatever reason they are using spices for their food, if that cuisine changes, that can definitely contribute to decline. Now again, it's an application question, that if this happens, can that happen? Yes, that can happen. So it will not be the answer. Third, the development of refrigeration techniques. One of the reasons for spices is that they can be used to preserve the food in the absence of refrigeration. If refrigeration is there, you might not need spices. So that also will cause the decline. Not my answer, therefore. Fourth, changes in the system of medical treatment. If there is medical treatment available for which you do not require spices anymore, that also will reduce the allure of spices. So this also will not be the answer. 1 is therefore my answer. In the context of the passage, the people who heard the story of pepper trees being guarded by snakes would be least likely to arrive at the conclusion that, wow, another application question. You have to think. So author says that people who have heard of the story of pepper trees, what is the story of pepper trees being guarded by snakes? This, that they are guarded by snakes. So if you want to take pepper from it, you have to burn the trees, and then snakes will go underground, etc. Would be least likely to arrive at a conclusion. That means, what is it that they would not be able to conclude? So everything that they can definitely conclude will not be the answer. Or what is it that they will not be able to conclude? So will be the answer. So something which is guarded by snakes must be difficult to harvest because of the risks involved. This is the hint. Now let's take a look at the options. First, that is why pepper is so hot. Acha. No information about hotness of pepper is given. Basically, how pepper gets the hotness, nothing like that is given. And we cannot infer that from it being guarded by snakes, because chalo, let's take a very far-fetched, like really stupid consideration. If you come up with a ridiculous thought that because you have to burn the trees, pepper becomes hot. What kind of hotness am I talking about? Am I talking about the hotness in terms of the warmth, or am I talking about the hotness in terms of the tanginess? Still, we do not have any information on that fire can cause tanginess. And in any case, you do not get peppercorns served hot. Oh, which makes no sense. So the point is very simple, that this is not a conclusion that people can arrive at if they knew the story of snakes. Pepper being hot or not is not related to snakes. So this should be my answer. Let's take a look at option number 2. It is no surprise that pepper supply is so limited. Absolutely. If something is guarded by snakes, if it is risky, then it makes sense to conclude that the supply would be limited. Otherwise, supply should be high, na, if things are not risky. Risky things always create a deficiency or a decline in supply. So second is something I can arrive at because it's a very easy conclusion, so not my answer. Third, pepper is costly for a good reason. Again, if something is very difficult to harvest, very risky, then it will have a premium. It will be costly. Easy conclusion to arrive at, not my answer. Fourth, it is not advisable to go to India to harvest the pepper themselves. This is also something I can easily conclude. If you get to know that peppers come with this process, so would you think that, now I am going to harvest that? No, you would not really want to risk your life. It would rather be easy for you to pay some money and take it from the people who bring it. So fourth also is something which can be concluded and hence not the answer. My answer is option number 1. Here is our passage and we have to find out the summary. So let's first find out the important points of the passage and then we will see which option captures them in the best possible manner. Recent important scientific findings have emerged from crossing the boundaries of scientific fields. They stem from physicists collaborating with biologists, sociologists, and others to answer questions about our world. So here I am saying that scientific breakthroughs basically have emerged from collaborations between physicists and non-physicists, you can say others. Because it's written sociologists, biologists, and others, so I'm just comparing physicists with others. But physicists and their potential collaborators often find their cultures out of sync. But there is a difference between physicists and these others. So you are collaborating, but there is a difference in culture. There is a difference. And what is that difference in culture? So you are saying physicists discard a lot of information. That means they do not focus a lot on data. They focus more on broader patterns. And others focus more on data. This is the contrast. This is the difference in research styles of these. But then author says, still the desire to work on something new and different is real. And there are benefits for that because of this collision. So despite this difference, the collaboration basically result in valuable findings. Okay, let's take a look at the options. First option, large data sets and mathematical models in physics research combined with research methods of non-physicist collaborators have yielded important scientific findings. it focuses only on large data sets and mathematical models, but it omits the broader aspect of interdisciplinary work, that they are collaborating and what they are getting. One thing. Second, it also does not focus on the idea of difference in the research style. That is also an important part of the passage. You are collaborating, you are getting important things, but that collaboration is happening despite you having different styles. Because in this case, collaboration is anyway difficult in such a scenario. And author is not capturing that in option number 1, and hence that is not going to be my answer. Second, the desire to diversify their research and answer important questions has led to several collaborations between physicists and social scientists. Now here, the focus is that physicists and others collaborate because they have a desire to diversify the research. But in reality, the passage is focusing on the fact that we get breakthroughs because of collaboration between physicists and non-physicists, despite their different approaches. Now, the discussion on different approaches, and you can say there are different approaches, and yet there are great results. There are different approaches, and yet there are great results. That is not given here. So this also is sort of not going to be a good answer, and hence we can easily eliminate that. Third, physicists have successfully buried their differences on research methods. Another confusing option. First of all, it says that there were differences, but they have successfully buried it, which basically means that there were differences, but for the sake of finding the answers of important scientific questions, they thought, let's bury our differences, let's not fight, let's go ahead. No. You are saying that despite their differences, they actually came up with amazing scientific findings. You have to focus on the idea that there are differences in their approaches, yet they are coming up with something good. It's not that they buried their differences. It's not like they were in fight with each other, but they thought that, I have a common enemy, you also have, we both have a common enemy, let's defeat that. Okay? So, very, very wrongly portrayed. Third is wrong. Fourth says, despite differences in their research styles, physicists' research collaborations with scholars from other disciplines have yielded important research findings. Absolutely bang on. That is exactly what author is talking about. Hence the answer. Alright, here is our passage. Let's find out the important points here, and then we'll see which option captures these points to the best possible extent, and that will be our answer. Different from individuals, states conduct warfare operations using the dime model. Most states do everything they can to inflict pain and confusion on their enemies before deploying the military. So when we talk about warfare, dime model is something which is used. But what is dime? Diplomacy, information, military economics. And within that, again, author says that military comes the last. Military comes the last. Okay. Then author talks about, then what is it that you generally do? Then author talks about attacking the vectors of information. And then a significant portion of the rest of the passage focuses on attacking the vectors of information through telecom, communication, blah, blah, blah. And how do they do that? By deploying cyber troops. By deploying cyber troops, they are using social media to manipulate opinions, spread false information as part of their warfare. Very simple. Let's take a look at the options now. First, governments primarily use the dime model to deploy cyber troops who practice low-grade information warfare. Absolutely not. It focuses only on cyber troops. In fact, it says that government uses dime model to deploy cyber troops. No. Warfare is conducted using dime model. Cyber troops is part of the information hacking within the dime model. Very wrongly portrayed. Wrong. Second, using the dime model together with military operations. Ping. You are not doing anything together. And what author is saying, together with the military operations, many governments simultaneously conduct information warfare. That means military and information warfare is going together. No, author says military comes in the end. You rather attack the information vectors first. Again, wrong information, not my answer. What about third? Following the DIME model, many governments have taken advantage of open data policies of the web to deploy cyber troops who manipulate domestic public opinion. Wrong on two fronts. First of all, open data policies in the passage are a concern, which is not mentioned as such here. Passage does not say that government take advantage of open data policy to deploy cyber troops. Second is that it focuses too much on the idea that it manipulates domestic public opinion. In a very simple logical term, why would it be used to manipulate domestic public opinion? You would rather, manipulate, the public opinion of other countries if it is a warfare mechanism for you, not the domestic public opinion. And again, it focuses too much on that idea also, so it is also not going to be a very good option. I'm going to eliminate that. Fourth, as part of conducting information warfare as per the DIME model, you are doing what? Warfare. Which warfare you are doing? Information warfare. And how do you do that? Monitoring telecom data, communication network, using cyber troops to manipulate public opinion on social media. Bang on, absolutely captures the thing that is said in the passage. Hence the answer, option number 4th. Let's take a look at this passage and find out the important points. Whichever option then captures these important points to the best possible extent should be my answer. John Cleese told Fox News Digital that comedians do not always have the freedom, to be funny in 2022. There is always been limitation on what they are allowed to say. I think it's particularly worrying at the moment because you can only create in an atmosphere of freedom whether you are not checking everything you say critically before you move on. So author says that comedy today can only be created in the atmosphere of freedom. And then author says that comedians basically have to think, can I get away with this thing if I say that? You see what I mean? And that is the death of creativity. So basically author is saying that this fear of offending somebody is stifling creativity, especially in comedy. So this is the basic discussion that is happening here. Let's take a look at the options. Comedians must not check what they think and say. Comedians must not check what they think and say. They must go where no one has gone before. Absolutely wrong. No. Comedians should definitely think, first of all. But although I am not saying this thing, basically author is just focusing on the idea that they should have creative freedom. But it's not like they should keep on saying anything. For example, a comedian should have a creative freedom to maybe, mock something. But the comedian should not just go about and curse everybody. Okay, so that's one thing. The idea of creative freedom is not even mentioned here, so that's not going to be my answer. Second, freedom and creativity are essential for comedy. Fear about offending people hinders that originality. So far so good, captures more or less everything. Could be my answer, I can keep it. Creativity and critical thinking cannot work together. Comedians must first be creative and later be critical. Nowhere in the passage a comparison between creativity and critical thinking is happening. There is no this versus that. Wrong information. Gone. Fourth, comedians are being prevented from saying what they want, and this is the death of the art form. Death of creativity does not mean death of the art form as comedy. Death of creativity means creativity is gone. You're stifling creativity. Death of art is a very big thing to say, that comedy has been dead. No. So fourth is also wrong. My answer will be 2. And you see, it captured these important points in the manner intended. Alright, so let's see where our main sentence will fit. Again, let's take a look at the sentence, try to find out if some hint can come up before reading the passage and identifying the broader theme. The main sentence is that the Europeans did not invent globalization. Very standalone sort of a sentence. Doesn't give me a lot of information as such. If it is a standalone sort of a sentence, then basically I can say that either it can come in the very beginning as say in the start of the passage, that this is my introduction, I am going to talk about it. Or it can come somewhere towards in the end, when you have discussed something and then you are giving it as a conclusion. Hence, I can say that European did not invent globalization. So I do not get a lot of hint. So I think it is a good idea to now read the passage and see if I can find out a gap and I can plug it. And if it works, it's great. So the first phase of globalization occurred long before the introduction of either steam or electric power. This starts with the historical introduction of first phase of globalization, which means now I know that my main sentence cannot be in the beginning, because my beginning is starting from the historical idea of globalization, that it was there. First phase happened before the introduction of steam or electric power. And then you are giving examples like Chinese consumers at all social levels consumed vast quantities of spices, etc. The peoples of Southeast Asia who lived in forests gave up their traditional livelihood and completely reoriented their economies to supply Chinese consumers. You're just discussing this thing. These exchanges of the year 1000, what exchanges? The exchanges that you just discussed with the example of Chinese. So there is no gap, one will not be the answer. And it opened some of the routes through which goods and peoples continued to travel after Columbus traversed the mid-Atlantic. Okay. Yet the world of 1000 differed from 1492 in important ways. Again, there is no gap. You have said that you have talked about Columbus, and then you are immediately saying, but you see, the world of 1000 and this world, 1492, which is the time of Columbus, is different. So this also does not represent any gaps. The second will not be the answer. Then the travelers who encountered one another in the year 1000 were not much closer technologically. They changed and augmented what was already there since 1000. Who are they here? Travelers? Now this is an important thing for you to understand. When we look at in the first glance, we do not find any gap, because we are saying that we are talking about travelers who encountered one another were different, as in that they were not much closer technology at that time. So then we can think of that they changed and augmented what was already there since 1000. The travelers changed and augmented whatever it was there in the early 1000. What will travelers change? What will they augment? That means what will they, enhance? Nothing like that is talked about. Now this is where you can fit your main sentence. The Europeans did not invent globalization. They just changed the idea of globalization, which was already there in 1000. Now the gap is resolved with the help of our main sentence, so it should ideally be in 3. And then of course you are just furthering that idea that if globalization had not yet begun, Europeans would not have been able to penetrate the markets. So you're just saying that Europeans were able to penetrate the market because these were already present. So fourth also will not be the answer, hence my answer will be 3. And that is exactly what we were discussing. But of course in this case my main sentence did not give me a lot of hint. So it was a good idea to look into the passage and find out if there is a gap. So my answer is blank number 3. Blank number 3 is coming at option number 1. So that's my answer. Here are 5 sentences. We have to find the odd one out. Let's find out the theme of every single sentence, and whichever doesn't fall in the common theme will be my answer. First, the UK is a world leader in developing cultivated meat, and the approval of a cultivated pet food is an important milestone. Interesting question actually. Sentence 1 talks about the UK being a world leader in cultivated meat. You cultivate the meat. And now they have approved the same for pets also. Okay. If we are to realize the full potential benefits of cultivated meat, the government must invest in research and infrastructure. This talks once again about what is the full potential of cultivated meat. Now it should be connected with 1 because it shows the potential in terms of pet food, and it also says that the government must invest, so maybe UK government. So far it talks about the potential of the cultivated meat. Both are in positive sense so far. Third, The first UK applications for cultivated meat produced for humans remain under assessment with the Food Standards Agency. This talks about the historical information on approval of UK's cultivated meat. Now, if it is historical idea, so it could also seem to be connected with the fact that today UK has become a world leader. So could be connected with 1 and 2, but we will not come to that conclusion right away. Let's read the rest of the sentences also. Previous UK government had been looking at fast tracking the approval of cultivated meat. This talks about the actions of previous government with respect to cultivated meat. Okay. Fifth, it underscores the potential for innovation to help reduce the negative impact of intensive animal agriculture. This also talks about the benefits of cultivated meat, that eventually if you reach a significant space, then you will be able to reduce the negative impact of animal agriculture because you are cultivating it, maybe through plants, I don't know. So this definitely seems to be connected with 1 and 2. So what is the broader theme of the passage? Broader theme of the passage is a positive theme in which we are discussing the benefits and the development in cultivated meat in the UK. Option number 4 talks about previous government's action, which is not related to the primary focus of the passage. And what's the primary focus? What is the current progress and benefit of cultivated meat? And hence this should be the odd one out. But this was a challenging question because the distinction among fourth one and rest of the options was quite bleak. So it was a good candidate if you wanted to leave that question. Although that's gonna be my answer, option number 4. That's all.